Welcome to our YouTube show, the MSP Growth Playbook, building smarter, stronger, and more profitable IT service firms. I am your host, Fernando Leon, and the title of today's show, The Hidden Sales Mistake Killing MSP Growth. So let's start this show up. Now, most MSP owners believe their biggest problem is sales. They think they need better scripts, better closers, or even better marketing. But what if the real problem starts long before the proposal? What if the hidden mistake that's killing MSP growth happens in the first conversation with the client? Today, we're going to break down the real reason many MSPs struggle to sell managed services and what must change if you want consistent and predictable growth. Let me start with a question I hear constantly from MSP owners because that's my market. I only work with CEOs of MSP firms, and this is what I constantly hear. How do I sell managed services without sounding pushy? It's one of the most common frustrations in this industry. And trust me when I say I've felt the same way. Nobody likes me pushy. Nobody likes to apply pressure. Owners also tell me things like, I don't want to feel like a salesperson. I just want clients to see the value. And like I mentioned earlier, nobody wants to pressure anybody. Nobody likes to be that annoying salesperson. It's like you sound like a car salesman. Nobody likes that. And I understand where that mindset comes from. Most MSP founders didn't start their companies because they wanted to sell. Not many of you love it. I've encouraged many of you to embrace it, but still, many of you don't like it. Now, a lot of you started this journey because, well, you're good at solving technical problems. But here's the uncomfortable truth. When MSPs struggle to sell managed services, the problem is rarely personality. It's rarely the script, and it's almost never the proposal. The real issue starts much earlier in the conversation. And if you miss this point, you can spend years trying to improve sales without fixing the real problem. So let me ask you a quick question, or a few questions. When you sit down with a prospect, what's the first thing you talk about? Is it your services, your tools, your security stack, your monitoring platform? You got to be careful on the flexing. Now, if that's where the conversation begins, we may have just uncovered the hidden sales mistake that's killing your MSP growth. I know it sounds so harmless. It sounds so, how would you say? It just sounds harmless, right? Talking about services and tools. I know but let me just I'm going to make my point, because the moment you start talking about services, the prospect starts comparing vendors. And once that happens, the entire conversation shifts, right? Once you start comparing they start comparing you to other vendors, what do you think happens? You've now become a commodity. You're no longer standing out. So what does that mean? Well, you're going to lose opportunities to price. Here's a scenario that happens thousands of times in the MSP industry. An MSP owner meets with the prospective client. The meeting starts friendly enough. They exchange introductions. They talk about the company. Maybe they discuss a few current IT issues, IT challenges, IT problems. The owner's complaining about the MSP they're working with. Who knows? It can be a number of issues. And then almost instinctively, the MSP owner begins explaining what they offer. We provide 24/7 monitoring. We handle patch management. We deliver cybersecurity protection. Now, from the MSP's perspective, this makes perfect sense. You're explaining your services. You're explaining your expertise, the hours of support, right? Which is around the clock. But from the client's perspective, something very different happens. They mentally move you into a category. Vendor, not advisor, not strategist, vendor. What also goes with vendor? Commodity. You don't want to be in that category. And once you're in that category, the client begins doing exactly what businesses are trained to do with vendors. They compare price. They gather multiple quotes. They ask for proposals, and suddenly the MSP owner is defending pricing instead of leading a strategic conversation. Let me know in the comments. If this sounds familiar, let me know. If it doesn't, well, leave a comment, leave a question. But if it does, if this does sound familiar, it's not because you're bad at sales. It's because the conversation started in the wrong place. So let me slow down for just a moment and look at something that most MSP owners overlook. And I will admit, I, myself, who's been doing sales for almost, 30 years. It took me a while to get there too, but this is something that was overlooked. Discovery. Discovery is where the sale actually happens. Not the proposal, not the presentation, not the contract. Discovery. And here's the problem. And this is a really big problem. Most MSP discovery conversations are very shallow, very surface-like. They last maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20 if you're a slow talker like myself. The MSP asks a few surface-level questions like, how many users do you have? What firewall are you using? Who's managing your backups? And then, almost immediately, the MSP begins offering solutions. Why? Why does this happen? Because technicians are wired to solve problems. When we see something broken, we want to fix it. That's just how we are. I don't know what it is, but it's in our DNA. But when you jump too quickly to solutions, you don't want to jump too quickly, okay? Something important gets skipped. The client never fully understands the problem. They never feel the risk. They never connect the operational impact. And if a client doesn't fully understand the problem, they won't fully value the solution. That's when you start hearing phrases like, we're comparing a few providers. Your price seems high. Let us think about it. Those responses are not objections. They're symptoms. Symptoms of a discovery conversation that didn't go deep enough. Everyone talks about, be ready for objections, and this is what you need to say. You know what? When you do a proper discovery, you won't hear objections. You won't be in that vendor category because you will be the answer to their problems. When you have the right sales process, you need a solid sales process. And guess what? You're going to get it here at the MSP Corner. Now, I'm digressing here. Now, let's pause for a moment and ask a deeper question. Why do MSP owners rush into solutions? It usually comes from good intentions. You want to demonstrate expertise. Flex, right? Everybody loves the flex. You want to show you understand their environment. You want to prove you can help. But here's the irony. That instinct can weaken your position. Because when you start offering solutions too early, you accidentally signal something. You signal that the problem is simple. And if the problem sounds simple, the solution sounds interchangeable. You can easily be swapped out, right? And if the solution sounds like Anybody can do it. Price becomes the deciding factor. This is why many MSP owners feel like they're constantly being compared to cheaper competitors. It's not because the client doesn't value IT. That's not it. They value IT. They just have to be taken down a certain path for them to see it. Now, it's also because the conversation never elevated beyond services. That's another reason. The moment a conversation becomes about services, the MSP loses strategic positioning. But when the conversation becomes about business risk, something powerful happens. The MSP becomes an advisor. And advisors aren't compared the same way vendors are compared. They're just not. You've built that credibility, and then what happens after credibility? Trust. You're the authority. You're the experts. So what needs to change? Well, the answer is not better closing techniques. Not even close. The answer is not more persuasive language. The real shift is this. Stop pitching managed services. Start diagnosing business risk. Let me say that again, because it's important. Start diagnosing business risk. Your job in the first conversation is not to sell services. Your job is to diagnose exposure, operational exposure, security exposure, downtime exposure. And if it's a regulated industry, now you have compliance exposure. Once the client begins seeing those risks, the conversation changes. You are now in a different category. Now, instead of asking about price, they start asking questions like, how would we fix this? How would responsible oversight look like? How quickly can we improve our position? At that moment, the MSP is no longer selling services. They're guiding a decision. And that is a very different position to be in. What have you got to lose? You've been doing the same thing over and over and over, and you're being compared to other vendors. What's it going to hurt to make a change to your sales process? That's why you got to join the MSP Corner, because we've got this process. We're going to be talking about it on our Expert Corner. Just go to one of the webinars. Now, let's talk about one of the hardest adjustments MSP owners must make: slowing down. Many MSP founders feel pressured to demonstrate value quickly. They want the prospect to see their expertise, so they move quickly toward recommendations. But the strongest advisors take the opposite approach. They slow the conversation down. They ask deeper questions. And what kind of questions are they asking? Well, what happens to your business when systems go down? How confident are you in your current security monitoring? When was the last time leadership reviewed technology risk? Who owns incident response if a breach occurs? These kinds of questions do something powerful. They shift the conversation from technology to business impact. And when a client begins thinking about business impact, the value of proactive oversight becomes obvious. At that point, managed services doesn't feel like a sales pitch. It feels like responsible management, authority, not a vendor, credible, trusted resource, advisor. That's the label you want. You want that advisor label, right? Because who do you go to when you need advice? To your advisor. They're the ones that you trust. You've invested in them, right? You've invested in that relationship. Now, there's another issue that often sits underneath this entire discussion: confidence. Many MSP owners are incredibly capable, obviously technical. That's why you guys are in this business. But when it comes to business conversations, they become cautious. They worry about sounding aggressive, assertive. But they worry about pushing too hard. They worry about losing the deal. So they soften the conversation. They hold back. They avoid asking deeper questions. But here's the irony in all of that. Clients don't hire MSPs because they're cautious. They hire MSPs because they want someone paying attention to risk, someone willing to point out problems, someone willing to say, this needs to be addressed. Confidence in those conversations changes everything, because when the MSP sales rep or owner speaks with clarity about operational risk, the client begins seeing them differently. And like I was saying, they don't see you as a vendor, but as a responsible advisor. Again, let me repeat that. You want to be that responsible advisor. Yeah, it takes a while to get there, but with practice, with mentoring, with guidance, you can get there. It's not that hard. Now, at this point, most MSP owners understand the concept. They understand that, well, discovery matters. They understand that diagnosing risk changes conversations. But implementation is where many firms get stuck. Habits are powerful. You've got to break it. First, you got to identify it and say, okay, I'm not going to do that, and make that change. You got to make that shift. Technical founders naturally revert to talking about technology. They rush through discovery, they move quickly toward recommendations, and they unintentionally recreate the same sales challenges. This is why many successful MSP owners eventually seek outside perspective. Not because they lack intelligence, but because changing behavior is difficult without accountability. Running an MSP is demanding. You're managing clients, managing staff, managing projects. Sales discipline often gets pushed aside. Sometimes what leaders need most is someone willing to challenge their thinking and keep them focused on what works. So, let me leave you with a challenge. Think about your last 5 discovery meetings. How long did they last? Were you diagnosing business risk or explaining services? Did the client clearly understand the operational impact of their current environment, or were you moving quickly towards solutions? Here's the hard truth. If your discovery conversations are under 20 minutes, you're probably pitching instead of diagnosing. And if you're pitching instead of diagnosing, the rest of the sales process becomes harder than it needs to be. The strongest MSP firms don't sell harder. They diagnose deeper. They're not scared to go into those deep channels. All right? Now, and let me just say this, and when that shift happens, something interesting is going to occur. Sales stops feeling like selling, and growth becomes much more predictable. Now, if you're an MSP owner struggling to win managed service deals, the answer isn't better scripts or more aggressive sales tactics or reading 10 more sales books or going to another seminar. It's not that. It's much more simpler. The real shift happens in how you run discovery conversations. Diagnose the risk. Slow the conversation down. Lead with business impact. All right, guys. I've talked for a little bit. Thanks for tuning into the MSP Growth Playbook. If this helped you tighten up your business model, hit subscribe and share it with your team or another MSP CEO. If you're struggling to sell value or differentiate your MSP, don't do this alone. Join the MSP Corner to get your MSP to that 6, 7, or 8 figure level. Don't forget to subscribe.